Did Sony just tease us again with Project Spartacus? We've got some rumors of a big PlayStation franchise coming back, the Resident Evil series is getting a huge next-gen upgrade, and did we just get some surprise updates on the next state of play? We're gonna find out in just a few seconds on today's episode of PlayStation News, and before we jump into all of it, make sure you're subscribed and have your notifications set to all. So with Horizon Forbidden West already out and Gran Turismo 7 coming this weekend, which by the way, you should definitely check out the review scores on that game because they are very high. People are really excited for what's coming next after God of War Ragnarok, and it looks like we're actually going to get yet another big PlayStation exclusive towards the end of the year. A leaker named VG News Insider revealed over on Twitter that PlayStation is around 70% done with development on a big remake of one of their classic franchises, and that the game is probably coming in Q4 of this year. Now, like Tom Henderson, Jeff Grubb, and all these other leakers we usually talk about, this is one that seems a little bit trustworthy because they actually just had their account taken down for a little bit on Twitter because they leaked Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, which were announced very soon after they were leaked, which kind of gives this leaker some credibility in my opinion, and we have heard rumors from other verified leakers that Sony is working on some sort of remake to come out later this year. Now, the most recent rumor is that they're remaking the first Metal Gear Solid game right now, which I know that's not necessarily a big PlayStation franchise, like in the sense that they don't own it. Konami owns Metal Gear Solid, but if you think about Metal Gear Solid 1, that game only came out on the PlayStation 1, and then it came to other consoles later, and of course they did a full remake of it for the GameCube. But most people consider Metal Gear Solid 1 one of the defining exclusive games of the PlayStation 1. So hearing this rumor that Sony's 70% done with the remake, and the other rumor that Metal Gear Solid is getting remade for the PSVR, which is supposed to be out by the end of the year, it's kind of like putting two and two together in my head and saying, yeah, this could be Metal Gear Solid for the PS5. And I really hope that's the case, because Metal Gear Solid is a totally playable game. There are multiple ways to play it now between the PlayStation Vita and on PC. You can emulate it and use AI upscaling to make it look a lot better. It's still a game from the PS1 generation, and that remake on GameCube was pretty good. It just messed a few things up that are pretty major in terms of fan enjoyment. So I'd really like to see PlayStation get their hands on it and make the remake we've all been waiting for. And what we've heard about this version is that it's going to be like Resident Evil 7, where it's going to have a fully playable, really interactive VR mode, where when you're using the PSVR 2, you can do stuff like put on the night vision goggles, you can put the cardboard box over your head, you know, you can aim your gun, you can do all the things you can do in VR. But if you want to play it as a normal game, it's going to work just fine. And Resident Evil 7 worked just fine as a non-VR game. Like, if you didn't tell me it had a PSVR mode, I don't think I would really even know. I hope that's how this Metal Gear Solid remake turns out, if that is what they're working on. Some other franchises that people think could come back are the original Infamous as a full-on remake, which would be cool because I like Delsin Rowe. I thought Infamous Second Son was good, but the first two Infamous games are a lot better in my opinion. I like Cole McGrath. I think he's a great character, and honestly, with the superhero craze that's going on right now, a full ground-up remake of Infamous would hit really hard, I think. The other franchise people think it could be is Jak and Daxter, which would make sense because we haven't seen a Jak game in a long time, and they are making a movie over at Sony Pictures. But to me, the game that I think it'll probably end up being is Twisted Metal. We know that the franchise is turning into a TV show over at Peacock with Anthony Mackie as the star. It's a 30-minute comedy action show that seems like it could be pretty cool, and we know that Sony has been working on Twisted Metal. They at first had the developer of Destruction All-Stars on the game, and apparently they were removed from it behind the scenes, but knowing that this thing is 70% done, I'm a little less inclined to believe that Twisted Metal is this specific game, but I'm pretty sure that's coming down the road. And after seeing how well the Uncharted movie did in theaters, I wouldn't be shocked if they came up with some sort of remake of the first game. I know it's available on the Nathan Drake collection, which is of course playable on the PS5, but that game is still pretty rough even in that collection. It got a very minor graphics and control update, so yeah, that's a game I really think could use a ground up remake. And tying it into the movie, they could say, hey, we're doing a sequel to Uncharted because it's our new big hit movie franchise, and if you want to get it on the ground floor and see how the franchise started, you can play this new remake of Uncharted 1. There are a ton of games from the PS3 generation that deserve remakes. I hope Sony starts remaking them all. I liked what they were doing back in the PS3 generation with PS2 games, where they'd give them an HD upgrade and make it a collection where you would pay $40 and get all 3 or 4 or maybe even 2 games on one disc. It was a pretty cool thing, but now I would like it a lot more if they just remade these games from the ground up. So I'm excited. It seems like that's what they're doing. Capcom, on the other hand, is doing something a little bit different with the Resident Evil franchise. So Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 2 Remake, and Resident Evil 3 Remake are all getting native PS5 upgrades, and if you already own the games, you're going to be able to get those upgrades for free. Now, unfortunately, they didn't give us any gameplay footage or a release date. They just say later this year, and there's 3 screenshots attached to the tweet where they announced that this was happening, but it is cool to see that this is going to be a free upgrade, and it seems like it's not just going to be a cut and paste job from the PC, like getting these games to run at high PC settings, because the PC versions of these games are also getting graphics updates, which means that they're doing a little bit more work. Obviously, the game that could use these upgrades the most is Resident Evil 7. I'm also curious if they're going to update the VR mode, because it does run a little bit rough these days, and it could be an easy way for them to line up with that PSVR 2 launch date, say, hey, we upgraded Resident Evil 7 to run with the PSVR 2 in mind, you're welcome. Also, it'd be great if they opened up VR and allowed it to run on other devices. It's kind of weird that Sony is still paying for exclusivity on that mode in Resident Evil 7. I would like to see it get some graphical updates though. Some of the textures, some of the lighting, the HDR isn't all that great in Resident Evil 7. They could do a lot of little things that would clean it up and go a long way in terms of graphic fidelity. The one that I think needs the least work is probably Resident Evil 2 Remake. That game looks incredible. There is a weird bug on PlayStation systems where when you're playing it, it has a weird reflection issue with some of the wood textures and floor textures. And also, after I got my hands on a PS5, that was one of the first games I re-downloaded, and I noticed that the issue was still there. If you've ever seen what video footage looks like before it's colored, that's kind of how the Resident Evil 2 Remake looks sometimes. So if they did a color pass and kind of evened it out across the board, I think that would go a long way. Also, the frame rate could just be a little bit more consistent on the console version. These are all small changes that again would go a long way. The Resident Evil 3 Remake, kind of the same thing. They need to do a bunch of small stuff like clean up textures, clean up the frame rate, but across the board, these games run extremely well because they're on the RE engine. One thing that I think they could really benefit from, again, across the board, is ray tracing. There are a ton of dark hallways, there's a ton of different lighting that is used throughout all of these games, especially in Resident Evil 7. You could do some really cool stuff with moonlight if you were using ray tracing, and in Resident Evil 3 Remake, I'm thinking back to the hospital level, that's some creepy lighting. Hospitals, I don't know why, especially around the 90s when that game takes place, they were just creepy. That's why you saw them in movies like Halloween 2, which I know came out in the 80s, but it's a great setting for a horror thing. I can think of a modern example like the movie The Void. The hospital lighting is just, I don't know, it creeps me out, right? Also, right now it seems like this is just going to be a digital upgrade, but I would really appreciate it if Capcom took a look at getting these games out physically for the PS5. I would love to have a collection of all 3 of these games in their native PS5 mode, especially if they came out with some cool box art. I remember back in the PS4 generation over in Europe, Sony released some really cool minimalist steelbooks for all of their big PS4 exclusives. The Bloodborne one in particular was awesome. I would love them to do something similar here with the Resident Evil franchise on PS5, or maybe even Capcom can make a collection. Like you buy a really nice 3-disc collection that has like an encasing box that, I don't know, could be like a chest or something from the Resident Evil franchise. I don't know what it could be, but having a nice steelbook 3-disc set of all of these games running on the PS5, that'd be a cool premium offering. And hey, maybe they could even make one for Resident Evil Village and include that as well, since that game's obviously not getting a PS5 upgrade because it already runs natively on the PS5. And I just realized that game already has ray tracing, so getting that working in these other 3 games probably wouldn't be too terribly difficult, since again, they all run in the RE engine. Going back to the rumor mill though, and verified sources, Special Nick, who we've talked about a bunch of times on this channel because of how many games he's leaked, is talking about Hogwarts Legacy and this big rumored March state of play we're allegedly getting. Now, last month it was supposed to happen, people were talking about a big state of play. It ended up being just a Gran Turismo showcase where they showed off all of these new features in Gran Turismo 7. I don't want to make light of that because that is a very big game. It's just we were getting rumors and leaks of a huge state of play, and then we found out that allegedly, according to these leakers, it was pushed to March. And this is supposed to be more of a showcase that's showing off new games that we have to look forward to in 2022 and going into the early parts of 2023. Hogwarts Legacy, though, is the one that people are really excited to see because this game's been delayed a few times. We heard those rumors that it was supposedly going to be delayed out of 2022, and then Warner Brothers hit back and said, no, this game is coming out at the end of 2022. Look forward to it. So the clock is kind of ticking for this game's big re-reveal. Thankfully, and kind of unfortunately, because I want to see more of it, we only ever got that one trailer that sort of showed off just a brief overview of everything we can look forward to in Hogwarts Legacy. I want to know how expansive this Hogwarts map is, right? Like, is it going to be a bunch of different maps where you have the main Hogwarts castle and then there's a loading screen between that and like the outdoor area or the forest where the Whomping Willow is? You know, there's a lot of stuff they can do here, and all of it is pretty exciting. Another thing we should see at this state of play is a God of War Ragnarok release date. This game's been in development for a really long time. It seems like it's definitely coming out this year, 2022. That's going to be the end of Kratos' Norse saga. I don't know if it's going to be the end of God of War. I doubt it, since that game sells like gangbusters now once again, which is crazy. But yeah, I'm really excited for that game, especially after checking out the PC version of God of War earlier in February. I'm just even more excited for God of War Ragnarok. I want to see how they can expand on that gameplay. It is just so absolutely brutal and violent. I love it. It would also be a great place to announce that Metal Gear Solid remake we were just talking about earlier in the video. We know Hideo Kojima is working on something new. I would love to see that as well. We know also there's a ton of stuff going on in the Silent Hill universe. That would be a great game to reveal. There's a lot of games, obviously, that we could see. Hey, we might even see that Resident Evil 4 remake, but it really does look like we are getting a state of play sooner rather than later. I hope we get some big games because, you know, we've had a lot of the big games come out this month, like Dying Light 2, Horizon Forbidden West, and now Elden Ring and Gran Turismo 7. So it'd be great to see Sony keep that momentum and start announcing some release dates and some new games that we haven't thought about or heard about in a long time. Over the past few months, Sony's really been working hard in the back end of the PlayStation Network to get it ready for PlayStation Spartacus. We know that it's going to be a 3-tiered system that's built on top of PlayStation Plus, where you can pay $10 to get PlayStation Plus, you can pay $13 to get PlayStation Now game streaming, and then you can pay $16 a month and get everything, including a library of classic games that you can play on your PlayStation 5. People are obviously excited for that because PS3 emulation is finally happening. And now there's even more stuff lining up with this. So over in Japan, you can actually still send your PS3 to Sony to get it repaired and fixed, because I guess people are still playing on the PS3 over there, but Sony announced that in April of 2022, so next month, they're going to end service support on the PlayStation 3. And obviously you can look at that news story and say, yeah, it's because the PS3 is so old at this point and there's no one on it. But knowing how close we are to Sony announcing PlayStation Spartacus, it seems like things could line up perfectly where they're saying, yeah, we are ending support on the PlayStation 3 because all of these PS3 games are now going to be playable on the PS5. We're going to have a small selection at launch and we'll add more to the subscription service over time. Now, just because it's been so long that we've been waiting for PlayStation emulation, I hope they don't do it like Xbox did, where they did batches of games where they said, yep, we're adding these in game by game over time. I know that was like a news story where they would have big games get added that would keep Xbox in the news, but they needed that, right? They didn't have really any big first party games coming out last generation, so the way that they stayed in the news was by making batches of games people really wanted and separating out first party titles that would come to backwards compatibility. Sony doesn't really have to do that. I hope on day one we get some of the heaviest hitters from the PS3 generation, like the Infamous trilogy, like the Resistance trilogy, Metal Gear Solid HD collection, because that's the best version of that collection. You get Metal Gear Solid, Metal Gear Solid 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, which is my favorite Metal Gear Solid game, and then you'll also hopefully have Metal Gear Solid 4, which would be great. The Silent Hill HD collection is kind of the worst way to play 2 and 3, but I would still like to see it on the PS3 nonetheless. Little Big Planet 1 and 2 would also be great to see. I remember when they showed off that game, when they announced it, the coolest thing about it was that the skateboard you could ride on looked super realistic and had awesome physics. I'd love to revisit that level, especially because the music in it was so good. And then hell, they could get even crazier with games like the Twisted Metal remake that came out on the PS3 that had awesome online multiplayer. They could do Warhawk for the same reason. They could do Lair, which was a dragon riding game where you use the 6-axis controller to control the game. That game killed a studio, but it was really cool. Heavenly Sword is a Ninja Theory game. That would be a cool way to punch back at Microsoft and say, yeah, you own Ninja Theory, but one of their coolest games that's super underrated is now playable on the PS5. It would be cool to see them get these retroactive updates that the Xbox side of things were getting. And again, we've waited so long for this emulation. I just hope it works great right when it comes out. Also, getting some of the multiplayer back in these games would be really cool. I don't know how feasible that would be on Sony's end, but I used to play the Resistance 2 multiplayer all the time, and it was super underrated. Oh, I forgot about the Killzone franchise. Killzone 2 and 3, I'd love to see those come to this service. There are so many games that Sony could blow the doors open with day one and say, yeah, you're getting all of these classic PS3 games that you haven't played in a long time. I just hope they actually turn around and do it sooner rather than later. But again, this PS3 PS3 news of them ending support in Japan is a good sign. The timing is just a little too weird, right? But yeah, if you have a PS3 over in Japan, you might want to contact Sony support sooner rather than later and see if you can get anything that's wrong with it fixed, because by the end of April, you're not going to be able to.